All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on something I think you guys are going to find super interesting. It's called the let them theory. And it's this idea that Mel Robbins put out there on Instagram and then followed up with a podcast episode. But the Instagram post alone got like 14 million views.
Yeah.
So clearly this is something that is resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it sounds so simple at first, just these two words, let them. But when you start to think about the implications of that idea, it can really change how you approach relationships, your work life. You know pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to unpack in this deep dive.
Exactly. And I think one of the first questions we have to ask is, why are we so obsessed with trying to control others in the first place? Where does that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Is it anxiety? Is it some kind of like overbearing love? Or sometimes maybe it's just a way to avoid our own responsibilities.
Right. Or maybe a combination of all of those things. And, Robbins has this great story about an avocado pit, which sounds random, but it's actually a perfect analogy.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
She's talking about how, you have this avocado pit and you're trying to get it out of the avocado. And you're like squeezing it and like twisting it and it's just not budging. And you get so focused on like making it do what you want it to do that you don't even realize there's a better way.
Right. There's a tool for that, a knife. But we just get so fixated on our being the right way.
Exactly. And that's what we do with people sometimes too. We're so busy trying to control them and make them fit into our idea of how they should be that we forget to just let them be.
And it creates so much unnecessary struggle, right? It's like we're constantly paddling upstream.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, it's like this idea from Dr. Amy Johnson. She talks about how when we're trying to force our will on others, it's exhausting. Like we're fighting against the current.
But let them is about dropping the oars.
Exactly, surrendering to the flow and finding that peace.
Yes, radical acceptance.
Right, and there are three main ways we can actually apply this let them idea in our lives. The first is detachment.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. What does detachment actually look like in practice?
Well, it's basically about letting go of the need to control things that are ultimately outside of our control.
So like what kind of things?
Well, think about something like seating arrangements at a wedding.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes.
That is something that people get so stressed out about.
Right. And it's like, why are we putting so much energy into this? Ultimately, it doesn't really matter who sits where. Everyone's going to have a good time.
Right. It's not worth the emotional turmoil.
Exactly. Or what about when a friend plans a trip and they don't invite you?
Oh, that one can sting.
But again, it's their choice. They get to decide who they want to travel with. And sometimes it's just not going to be you.
And that's okay.
Right, or even something as simple as airline boarding procedures. The whole like zones and group numbers thing.
Oh yeah, that can be so frustrating.
But ultimately, we can't control it, so why get worked up about it?
It's like choosing your battles right.
Yeah.
Save your energy for the things you can actually influence.
Exactly. Detachment is about acknowledging what is and choosing not to fight it.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the second application of let them?
Letting go of responsibility.
That sounds like a tough one.
It can be, because it often means giving others the space to potentially mess up, to learn from their own mistakes.
So we're not swooping in to rescue them every time they stumble.
Right. We're giving them the opportunity to experience the natural consequences of their actions.
Which can be hard to watch, especially when we love someone and we want to protect them from pain.
I know, but think about it this way. If someone is constantly bailing you out, do you ever really learn from your mistakes?
That's a good point. I'm thinking about Robin's story about her husband and how he learned this big financial lesson. Because his brother refused to lend him money when he was struggling.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
It forced him to take responsibility and figure things out on his own.
And ultimately, that made him stronger and more resilient.
So sometimes not rescuing someone is actually the most loving thing we can do.
Exactly. It allows them to build their own problem-solving skills.
Okay, so detachment, letting go of responsibility. What's the third application?
This one might be the most important, accepting people as they are.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one. Especially in relationships.
Absolutely. It's about letting go of that potential we see in others and appreciating them for who they are right now.
So instead of trying to mold them into our ideal version of them.
Exactly. We embrace the beautifully flawed individuals they already are.
Because when we're fixated on who we think someone should be, we miss out on the joy of connecting with them as they actually are.
Right. Robbins talks about how when you distract yourself by griping about what you wish would change, you're in a relationship with the things you don't like.
That is so powerful. It's like we're choosing to focus on the negative instead of appreciating all the good.
And that negativity can really poison a relationship. Accepting someone doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they do, but it does mean letting go of that constant need to change them.
Which must be incredibly freeing, both for the person being accepted and for the person doing the accepting.
It allows for genuine love and presence in relationships.
And this idea of acceptance can also apply to emotions, right?
Absolutely.
Like if a friend is going through a tough time and they're expressing a lot of anger or sadness,
We don't try to fix it for them. We just listen and hold space for them.
without judgment.
Exactly.
Because trying to control someone's emotions often just makes things worse.
It's invalidating. It's like we're saying their feelings aren't okay.
Which is the opposite of what they need in that moment.
Right, they need to feel heard and understood.
This let them approach is starting to sound like a masterclass in healthy boundaries.
It really is. It's about understanding where your responsibility ends and where theirs begins.
And speaking of boundaries, there's another big one that Robbins tackles. Jealousy.
Ah, yes. Jealousy, the classic example of control disguised as love.
Well, I've been there. I think we all have at some point. Whether it's a partner spending time with someone else, or a friend going out without you, or even a colleague getting recognition for a project you worked on.
It can be so easy to get caught up in those jealous feelings. But if we take a step back and really examine what's driving that jealousy,
What do we find?
often it's rooted in insecurity, a fear of losing love, or feeling inadequate.
So how do we apply let them to jealousy?
By recognizing that someone else's choices in relationships don't diminish their love for you.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like, let's say your partner has kids from a previous relationship and they're spending time with them. Instead of feeling resentful, try to embrace their bond and trust that it doesn't take away from their love for you.
It's about recognizing that love isn't a finite resource.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the three main applications of let them. Detachment, letting go of responsibility, and accepting people as they are. But before we move on, I think it's important to mention that Robbins does offer some caveats to this theory.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a free pass for bad behavior.
Right, it doesn't apply to situations involving danger discrimination or consistent boundary crossing.
Like if someone's safety is at risk or you're being treated unfairly, you absolutely need to advocate for yourself and seek support.
Let them is not about being passive or letting people walk all over you.
Right, and Robbins specifically calls out salary negotiations as a situation where you should not just let them decide.
Know your worth and advocate for yourself.
Exactly.
It seems like let them is this powerful tool for navigating life's complexities, but it's not a blanket solution for every situation.
Well said. It's about finding that balance between surrendering to what you can't control and taking action where it's necessary.
My mind is already buzzing with all of this.
I know, right? But there's more Robin. Robbins also offers these 3 really helpful self-coaching questions to help us when we feel that urge to control creeping in.
Oh, happy with them.
The first one is, what am I afraid of?
That's a good one.
Because so often our desire to control comes from fear.
Right, like in that wedding seating example. Maybe we're afraid that things won't be perfect or that someone will judge us.
Exactly. But once we name that fear, it starts to lose its grip.
Okay, what's the second question?
Whose business am I in?
Ooh, I like that one.
This is all about boundaries. Are we overstepping? Are we trying to control something that's not ours to control?
I remember that story Robbins shared about her friend who was upset about not being included in a trip.
Oh, yeah.
And the friend eventually realized she was inserting herself into something that wasn't her business.
Right. It was their trip, their choice.
And if she wanted more social connection, she needed to take responsibility for creating those opportunities herself.
Exactly. It's about focusing our energy on our own sphere of influence.
Okay, I'm loving these questions. What's the third one?
What feels more like peace?
That's a powerful one.
It invites us to check in with our emotional state and make a conscious choice. Do we want to continue down this path of control, frustration, and resentment? Or do we choose to let go and embrace peace?
It really gets to the heart of what let them is all about. Choosing emotional peace over the illusion of control.
Exactly. And that's a choice we can make in every moment, even when things feel chaotic. We can pause, ask ourselves these questions, and choose the path that leads us towards greater peace and freedom.
Wow. I'm already feeling a shift in my thinking just from this conversation.
Me too.
You know, the more we talk about this, the more I realize how much it goes against some of our deeply ingrained ideas about being helpful.
Right, like we're taught to be fixers, to jump in and solve everyone's problems.
Exactly, even when they haven't asked for our help.
It's almost like we're conditioned to think that being helpful means taking charge. But as we're learning with let them, sometimes the most helpful thing is to step back.
And give others the space to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that saying about giving a man a fish versus teaching him to fish.
Yeah, we're so focused on providing the immediate solution that we forget about the long-term empowerment.
It's about shifting from that hero mentality to a more supportive role.
Sometimes the best support we can offer is simply our presence, our empathy, and a willingness to let go.
Mel Robbins also had a really insightful point about how we try to control other people's emotions.
Oh, yeah, especially when those emotions are directed at us.
It's like our instinct is to calm them down or talk them out of their feelings.
And that often backfires, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. Because instead of letting them fully experience their emotions, we're trying to control their emotional state.
Which can feel really invalidating.
It creates this weird emotional tug-of-war where no one wins.
And it's exhausting for everyone involved.
So with Let Them, it's more about creating that safe space for emotions to flow.
Exactly, without judgment or intervention.
And that also frees us from the burden of being responsible for someone else's emotional well-being.
Right, because ultimately we can't control other people's emotions.
And trying to do so just creates more stress and disconnection.
And, this principle applies to so many areas of life, not just emotions.
It's about recognizing that true power lies in mastering ourselves, our reactions, and our emotional responses.
Well said.
Okay, so we've talked about detachment, letting go of responsibility, accepting people as they are, and navigating emotions. But what about a topic like addiction? It seems like let them might be a difficult concept to apply in that situation.
It definitely can be, especially when we love someone who's struggling with addiction.
Our natural instinct is to help, to fix things, to make it go away.
But as Mel Robbins points out, no one gets sober until they're ready.
Yeah, that's a tough one to accept. It's heartbreaking to watch someone we care about suffer and not be able to fix it for them.
I know it goes against everything we've been taught about being helpful and supportive.
But rescuing someone from their struggles can actually do more harm than good in the long run.
It prevents them from hitting their own rock bottom and truly understanding the consequences of their choices.
So in a situation like that, Robbins is saying we have to let them.
We have to let them hit that rock bottom, if that's what it takes for them to get to the other side.
It's not our place to force them into treatment
Uh-huh.
or manage their recovery.
Right, and that can be really hard for loved ones to accept.
So what can we do?
We offer support and love without enabling their behavior. We set healthy boundaries and let them know we're there for them when they're ready to seek help.
But we also let go of the outcome.
Exactly. We can't control whether someone gets sober.
And attaching our happiness to their recovery only creates more suffering for everyone involved.
It's about focusing on our own well-being while still offering unconditional love and support.
And remembering that their journey is ultimately theirs to navigate.
Our role is to be a source of strength and encouragement, not to try to control the outcome.
It takes a lot of trust to step back in that way.
It does, but it's ultimately the most loving and supportive approach.
And this principle applies to so many areas of life, not just addiction.
It's a reminder that we can't control other people's choices, their outcomes, or even their emotional states.
We can offer guidance, support, and love.
But their path is ultimately theirs to walk.
Which brings us back to those self-coaching questions from Robbins. They can be really helpful in those moments when we feel that urge to control creeping in.
Absolutely. They remind us to pause, reflect, and ask ourselves, what's the most loving and supportive approach I can take right now?
So just to recap, the questions are, what am I afraid of? Whose business am I in? And what feels more like peace?
Those are such powerful tools for grounding ourselves and choosing a more conscious and empowering path.
Okay, so we've talked about how let them can be applied to emotions, addiction, and navigating challenging situations. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how let them might play out in a work setting.
That's a great question, because we often think of let them in the context of personal relationships.
Right, because that's where our need for control can be most intense.
But you're right, this concept has huge implications for our work lives as well.
Because let's face it, work can be a breeding ground for control issues.
Absolutely.
We have deadlines, performance expectations, team dynamics, and all sorts of opportunities to get caught up in trying to control things that are ultimately outside of our control.
We might find ourselves micromanaging colleagues or taking on tasks that aren't our responsibility.
Because we think we can do it better or faster.
Or maybe because we're people pleasers.
Exactly.
But in those moments, let them can be a powerful antidote.
It's about recognizing that your colleagues are capable adults who can handle their own work.
It's about setting healthy boundaries and trusting them to do their jobs effectively.
So instead of hovering over them, offering unsolicited advice, or taking over their tasks,
We step back, offer support when it's requested, and allow them the space to do their thing.
their success is not dependent on your control.
In fact, by giving them autonomy, you're empowering them to grow, learn, and develop their own skills.
And this applies to team dynamics as well. When we try to control every aspect of a project, it stifles creativity and collaboration.
People become afraid to speak up or take risks.
It creates a very restrictive and ultimately unproductive environment.
But by embracing let them in a team setting, we create a space where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their unique perspectives and talents.
It's about fostering that sense of trust and collaboration, where people feel safe to experiment, make mistakes, and learn from each other.
Which ultimately leads to a more dynamic and innovative work environment.
It's amazing how this simple concept of let them can be applied to so many different areas of life and have such a profound impact.
It's about shifting our focus from control to empowerment, from micromanaging to mentoring, from dictating to collaborating.
It's a powerful shift.
That can transform not only our individual work experiences, but the entire culture of our workplaces.
And it's fascinating how embracing let them in our professional lives can often bleed into our personal lives as well.
Yep.
We start to build this muscle of letting go, trusting others, and surrendering to the flow.
Which creates a greater sense of peace and ease that permeates every aspect of our lives.
We stop carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders and allow others to share the load, take responsibility for their own lives, and contribute their unique gifts to the world.
It's a beautiful cycle. The more we practice let them in one area of life, the more it naturally extends to others.
We become less controlling, more trusting, and more open to the possibilities that emerge when we relinquish our grip on things we can't control.
It's like we're creating this ripple effect of peace and freedom that spreads outward from us touching everyone we interact with.
Okay, so we've covered how let them can be applied to emotions, addiction, work dynamics, and even our broader worldview. Is there anything else from the source material you want to highlight before we move on to the final part of our deep dive?
There's one more point I'd like to touch on that I think is incredibly important. It's about the concept of potential and how our focus on someone's potential can actually hinder their growth.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, Robbins talks about how we often fall into this trap of seeing someone's potential and then trying to mold them into that idealized version of themselves.
Like we have this vision of who we think they could be or should be.
Exactly, and we start trying to control their choices, their behavior,
Yeah.
even their thoughts.
It's like we're trying to turn them into these perfectly sculpted bonsai trees instead of letting them grow into their own unique and beautiful forms.
I love that analogy because it's so true. We're stifling their natural growth. Instead of allowing them to blossom into their authentic selves, we're imposing our own expectations and limitations on them.
This is so true, especially in our relationships with children. We have all these hopes and dreams for them, and it's easy to get caught up in trying to steer them towards certain careers, hobbies, or even relationship choices.
Of course, we want the best for them, but true happiness comes from allowing them to discover their own path, to follow their own passions, and to make their own choices, even if those choices differ from our own.
It's about recognizing that their journey is theirs to navigate.
And our role as parents, mentors, or even just friends is to offer support and love without judgment or expectation.
And trust that they have their own inner wisdom, their own unique gifts to offer the world.
And that their path will unfold perfectly as it's meant to, even if it looks different than what we might have envisioned.
It's about letting go of our need to control the narrative and allowing them to write their own story.
And, I think this principle applies to all our relationships, not just with children.
When we release our attachment to someone's potential, we give them the freedom to be fully themselves, to make mistakes, to learn and grow at their own pace.
And to ultimately create a life that is authentic and meaningful to them.
It's a profound act of love and respect, to simply allow someone to be who they are without trying to change them or mold them into something they're not.
And the beauty of it is when we let go of our expectations, we often find that people exceed our wildest dreams in ways we could never have imagined.
It's like we're opening up the space for miracles to happen, both in their lives and in our own.
Exactly, by embracing let them. We're not only creating more peace and freedom for ourselves, but we're also creating a more supportive and empowering environment for those around us to thrive and flourish.
This is such a beautiful concept.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've only just begun to explore its depths.
There's so much more to unpack. I'm so glad we're doing this. It's such a fascinating concept.
You know, it really is.
Yeah.
Because it's so simple on the surface.
Yeah.
Just 2 words, let them.
Exactly.
But it has such profound implications.
It challenges us to really examine our beliefs about control and responsibility and all of that.
Yes, like it disrupts all those automatic patterns,
Mhm.
the ones we've inherited from our families, our culture, even our own past experiences.
And it invites us to try something new.
A more conscious way of being in the world.
And that can be scary sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Letting go is not always easy,
It can feel really vulnerable.
especially when we've been taught to be in control, to fix things, to
Yeah.
have all the answers.
Robbins talks about how a lot of people get stuck on the fear of consequences.
Oh, yeah. What if we let go and things fall apart?
What if someone gets hurt? What if we're seen as weak or uncaring?
It's like we have this belief that we're the only ones holding everything together.
But the truth is, our attempts to control everything often create more chaos and stress.
It's like that analogy of trying to hold a handful of sand.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away.
But if you open your hand and let go, the sand settles and you can actually see it more clearly.
And that's what surrender is all about, right? Letting go of that need to control and trusting that things will work out.
Surrendering to what is, surrendering to the flow of life.
And when we do that, it frees up so much energy and space to focus on what truly matters.
Our well-being, our growth, our contributions to the world.
Instead of constantly trying to manage other people's lives, we can finally start living our own.
Okay, so here's a question that I hear a lot about let them. What about accountability?
That's a good question. Because it might sound like we're saying, just let people do whatever they want with no consequences.
Right, but that's not what it's about at all.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
It comes down to discernment, knowing when to step in and when to step back.
And that comes from self-awareness, understanding our own values and limits.
Like Robbins gives the example of someone driving drunk.
Yeah, that's not a let them situation.
You take action to protect their safety and the safety of others.
Or if someone is consistently violating your boundaries, you don't just passively accept it.
You assert yourself to
Yes.
communicate your needs and enforce those boundaries.
So let them doesn't mean we become passive doormats.
It's about recognizing what you can control and what you can't.
And choosing your battles wisely.
Everyone is on their own journey, and sometimes those journeys involve making mistakes, learning lessons, and facing consequences.
Our role is not to rescue them from those consequences, but to offer support and guidance as they navigate those challenges.
It's not about being indifferent, it's about offering love and support, while simultaneously allowing others to own their choices and learn from their experiences,
It's about true empowerment.
allowing others the freedom to be themselves, to make their own choices and to create their own destinies.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the biggest one for me is the power of surrender.
Letting go of that need to control,
Trusting that life will unfold as it's meant to.
and that we have the strength to navigate the challenges along the way.
Another key takeaway is self-awareness. Let them invites us to examine our own patterns.
Our fears, our need for control.
Are we overstepping boundaries? Are we taking on too much responsibility? Are we projecting our expectations onto others?
It's not always easy to face those things.
But it's essential for growth.
And finally, I think this whole conversation has been a beautiful reminder that we're not alone in this journey.
We are all interconnected.
By supporting each other's growth, allowing each other the freedom to be ourselves, and embracing the power of surrender, we create a more loving, compassionate, and harmonious world for everyone.
That's beautifully said.
So to our listeners, I want to leave you with this question. In what area of your life could embracing let them bring more peace and freedom?
Maybe it's a relationship, a work situation, or even just a personal habit or pattern you've been clinging to.
What would it look like to let go of that need to control and trust in the unfolding of life?
Every time you choose let them, you're taking a step towards a more peaceful, empowered, and fulfilling existence.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the let them theory.
It's been an honor to explore this with you,
We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
and that you'll continue to explore this concept and discover its transformative potential in your own life.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep letting go.